want to explore the subject of cruelty because it really doesn't get dealt with in a lot of situations, and it creates a blind spot that perpetuates pain. And as far as I can tell from the etymology of the word, it goes back to crua, or raw meat. In terms of current definitions, cruelty and indifference or pleasure in causing pain and suffering, indifference to another's suffering. And we're joined here by Philip, who may or may not be in view or making an appearance, but any snorting, huffing, and puffing, that's Philip's contribution. So this provides a very easy window into understanding an extraordinary level of cruelty going on around us, indifference to another's suffering. So I'm in Marin County, California, the fifth wealthiest county in the United States. And in a recent City Hall meeting in which I watched the video as trying to understand what's going on with homelessness, it was basically acknowledged that for 20 years, homelessness has been growing, that there never has been, is not, and perhaps never will be a response to the needs of the homeless for low-cost housing. And that's not quite accurate, because the response to the need for low-cost housing is actually pretty consistent. Just about every single activity of the local city government that relates to housing has increased the cost of housing. So in the last 20 years, housing taxes have gone up. Building codes have gone up. Permit fees have gone up. Land prices have gone up. There is nothing at all that anyone has done that has reduced the cost of housing. And then you think, okay, well, it's not the government's job to solve the people's problem. And then you say, well, why is there a low-cost housing shortage? For example, if you go to Thailand, where the average income is $300 a month, why does everyone have a home? Well, it gets down to the essence of what a home is. A home is a safe, legal place to sleep where you feel that you belong. It's that simple. It can be a tin hut, it can be an igloo, it can be a tent, a safe, legal place to sleep where you feel that you belong. Well, in the last 20 years, the city of San Rafael, for example, has banned sleeping in one's car. So some people might feel at home and safe and legal sleeping in their car until a law is passed to make it illegal to sleep in the car. And some might sleep in tents in public parks, except that's been banned as well. And what about sleeping on the side of the road? That's been banned as well. So the building code, in terms of this idea of keeping government out and letting people solve their own problems. See, in Thailand, people don't just pay lip service to this dogma. They actually do it. No government agency in Thailand will come along and say, you built a little tin hut in your garden for your grandmother. Do you have a permit for that little tin hut for your grandmother? No, of course they don't have a permit. The government keeps out of it. But not our government. Our government says, first of all, you need a minimum of 1,200 square feet. Well, I don't want a 1,200 square foot house. Well, you have to. That doesn't sound like keeping out of it. That sounds like getting in your face and saying, we're going to dictate a minimum size for your house. Meaning you may want to save resources for the environment. You may want to save money. You may not be able to build a 1,200 square foot house. We don't care. You have to build a 1,200 square foot house or you're not welcome here. We won't give you a permit. We will tear your house down. Does that sound non-invasive? Of course not. It is the most obnoxious and invasive intrusion in human rights imaginable in the land of the free. Thailand doesn't go around boasting about the land of the free. People are just free to live because their government doesn't get in their face and block the most basic human needs. Now, the Thai government doesn't stop people from getting water where they want it either. There's plenty of places, even restaurants in Thailand, where a water truck drives up once or twice a week and fills some little tank, and the drinking water comes from the water truck. Other people get bottled water. Other people drink soda. There's no government telling you how you have to drink. So when the government gets out of your hair, and you can erect a little tent, a teepee, a tin hut, a large tin hut, a concrete building, etc., etc., and as long as it's not for commercial use beyond a certain height, you're pretty much left to be an intelligent person as you see fit. And so you could say it's incredibly cruel, indifferent to another's suffering, to increase the homeless population on the one hand, shame and banish the homeless population on the other hand, and intrude in the rights of people to have safe legal housing by making it so expensive to build in my area that it is impossible to build a home for less than $650,000. Now, this creates hostility because the homeless cannot afford a $650,000 house, and so they have to be given one. Where does the money have to come from? Well, it has to come from other people. Well, how many people want to not only work hard enough to buy a $650,000 house for themselves, but then work hard enough to pay for someone else's $650,000 house? It's too much. It is an act of cruelty to place that amount of a financial burden on an average person. So this creates another form of cruelty and suffering. Lower cost workers have to be pumped in to the county daily and then drive, 1-2 hours out for low-paying jobs that the housing market can't support. So now we have a cruelty on the environment. So first we're going to increase housing prices. Secondly, we're going to shame and make it harder for the homeless. And thirdly, we're going to tax the environment, not only with these excessive, building regulations. You cannot build a 120 square foot house. You can't say in your own intelligent mind, I know what the problem is. With housing prices at $300 a square foot, I can't afford 2,000, 3,000, whatever square feet. I know I can afford 150 square feet, 92 square feet. I can afford a nice little sleeping area like this, and I'll take the rent money and the mortgage money saved and I'll invest it in local restaurants. Every day, I'll eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I'll drive on my bicycle, get rid of a car, and I'll enjoy my retirement with a nice sleeping area, favorite restaurants, good exercise on my bicycle. But no, you have to have X amount of parking spaces, which on steep slopes might be a $100,000 parking place. And then you have to have the $30,000 in permits. And then you have to have the delay. And then you have to pay an architect, $8, $10, $20, $30, $40, $50,000 to draw up your plans. And then you have to be told how you have to spend $3, $4, $500,000 building the house that has been dictated by code to you. It is an act of profound cruelty. So cruelty is indifference to another's suffering. Indifference simply means that when you meet the face of pain, you do not differ the behavior that causes the pain. So, if I'm bleeding to death, and you say, "Oh, nice to meet you, I've got to go," it is a cruel act because you are not altering your behavior to respond to the pain. You're not acknowledging that I'm about to die. You're not acknowledging that you could do something about it. Call 911, anything like that. You're not pumping in blood. You're not differing your behavior. It is indifference to another's pain. One of the reasons I got involved with local homelessness is I realized I'm driving by the same sick, unhappy people who have no place to go every day, just like everyone else. Massive amounts of indifference doesn't change my behavior. And indifference can come from a variety of things. It can come from insensitivity. In its extreme, a sociopathic state, meaning it just doesn't affect me that anyone else is feeling anything. Happy, joy, pain, doesn't affect me. An extreme, a sociopathic state. And of course, the callus, if you think of what a callus is, a thickening of the skin, such that what might be excruciating to someone else to watch is, it's just normal. So when there's pain present, you either respond, you differ. You don't indiffer, you differ the behavior that's creating the pain. And, for example, the differ in the behavior that's creating the pain, the behavior that is creating thousands of homelessness, thousands of people who are homeless, in one of the wealthiest counties in one of the wealthiest countries in the world, that's not even keeping up with Thailand in terms of its humanity in this domain. The difference is, let's stop colluding with architects, realtors, builders, city officials to raise housing prices. The fire department has raised housing prices. The water department has raised housing prices. The sewer department has raised housing prices. The city and its taxes have raised housing prices. The building department has raised housing prices. Every code that's gone into effect in the last 50 years has raised housing prices. Now, so the difference in an environment in which there is an entire demographic, meaning 10% of the U.S. population cannot get into the military because their IQ is too low. Now, the military is usually considered somewhat of a cleanup for delinquents, people that can't quite do something optimal, get to college, etc. The military is seen as somehow, let's transform people who don't have the skill to be an executive of some kind, or someone important or high salaried. Let's turn them into something useful for the country, etc. Well, 10% of the population has an IQ that the military cannot figure out what to do with them. The military doesn't have enough grunt work for 10% of the population. The very population that has trouble getting, an income that would afford a $650,000 house. So if we just accept the fact that 10% of our children and our colleagues and friends, etc., 10% do not have the aptitude for the types of jobs that require $650,000 homes. 1. 2, we do not have any homes that are less expensive. And 3, that throughout the history of the species, the sense of home has been the region in which you're born. And so you take Marin County, for example. And 70 or more percent of the homeless in Marin County or San Rafael were born in Marin County or San Rafael. So they're born into an environment that has no home that they are capable of affording. And some of them, their parents help them, and some of them, etc., etc. But of course, it is the most abused and unhealthy families who first abuse their children and then will not help them. And then will not help them, which often leads to the homeless. So you then have some of the most abused individuals who can't get help put into a situation in which they are guaranteed to flounder. That is a cruel act. Now, the indifference is to say, I know, let's just keep raising house prices because banks will make more money, realtors will make more money, builders will make more money, landscapers will make more money, architects will make more money, existing homeowners, when they sell, will make more money. We'll all make more money. The people who have the money will make more money. And the people who don't have any money will fall farther behind. I know, let's do that. That is a cruel act. Because it does not differ the behavior that is creating homelessness in a wealthy county in the United States with tons of money. It does not differ even to the level of creating quality of life as high as Thailand with $300 a month. We cannot figure out. We don't want to figure out. We don't want to differ. And so we continue the cruelty of ignoring the 42% of our homeless that have PTSD, ignoring the shame that they feel, because it is an act of exclusion, it is an act of humiliation, it is an act of cruelty to wake up at 18 years old and say, for some reason, the genetic lottery, who knows? For some reason, I can't get one of those $150,000 jobs. Okay, fine. Let me do some sculpting. Let me carve some wood. Let me mow someone's lawn. Okay, good on you. Good. $20 an hour, etc. Okay. The amount that I'm getting paid is not enough for rent or to buy a home. Who I am is not welcome here, is not prepared for, is not allowed for, is not honored. This is an act of shame. It's like inviting a child into the world, only to find that there's no milk, there's no crib. It's a cruel act. There's no present marriage, there's no healthy male-female template. And so, if we understand what cruelty is, the indifference to pain, We understand that we are a cruel culture. We are a culture filled with cruelty. Now, it's not black and white, but it is important. What this video is about is understanding the arenas that we have culturally designed massive amounts of pain, and then culturally designed indifference to that pain, and then culturally covered that up and denied the barbaric inhumanity of that cruelty and called it progress, called it nobility. Because, of course, if you were to stop looking at people and look at the houses, well, as houses have gone from $40,000 or whatever 50 years ago to $650,000, the trim on the house has improved. So if you are interested in houses more than you're interested in human beings, you'd have to say this is progress. But it is a sociopath that is more interested in things than they are in people. That is what socio means. Socio means people. The sociopath is the one that dissociates from people to do what? To focus on objectives, to focus on things. The sociopath knocks you out of your way to get to what they're trying to do, because the sociopath is not interested in people. So let's look at some of the areas. So we've got homelessness, the manufacture of a demographic that does not exist in Thailand. Now, there's plenty of addiction in Thailand. Alcohol consumption is very high, for example. It's just that it doesn't cost all that much money to throw together a small room, to put up a hammock. And so all of these people have a home. They have a safe, legal place to return to and sleep in which they feel welcome. The Thai don't shame their addicts, for example. They're kind to them in many ways. There's a home, and it costs very little to do. It actually costs more money in Marin County to understand just how deep the cruelty goes. It costs up to $65,000 in taxpayer money a year to implement the police protocols, the prison protocols, the park protocols, and the emergency care protocols. Surprisingly, when you give people PTSD by pushing them around, by making them feel unwelcome, by not giving them an affordable place to take showers, etc., surprisingly, disease goes up and medical care goes up. And so $65,000 a year. We spend it regularly to shame, humiliate, and make people feel unwelcome and that they are a burden. But we deny the exact same people the right to feel safe putting up a tent, a yurt, a teepee, building a little cottage, whether on public land or private land, thus creating a burden for which they are shamed. Now, this is actually a good segue into, part of the psychology of children, because children require what's called a secure attachment with a masculine energy and a feminine energy. The energy of structure, of discipline, of leadership, of teaching, of challenge, and the energy of nurture, of support, of healing, of validation, of tenderness, of love. Both are equal energies necessary to bring out the most in a human being. Children raised by single parents suffer considerably more than children raised in a secure, attached couple with a secure emotional attachment to a masculine and a feminine energy. It doesn't matter the gender, but there has to be both sides within the home. The data is clear. As a species, it is only in the last 40, 50 years that in a few cultures around the world, we have twisted our biology and our psychology into the idea that the individual parent's right to do whatever the fuck they want, whether it's cultural liberation or whatever, transcends the right of a child to be raised with secure emotional relationships with healthy adults. This is a cruel act. Children who are raised in insecure emotional and financial relationships without a stable masculine and feminine connection have higher anxiety. They have greater emotional volatility. They have worse mental emotional health. It is a cruel act to deny the causes of this activity. It is an act of profound cruelty to say, well, I want a child, and I want to live my life the way I want. It's no different than saying, I want a dog, and I'd like to leave it cooped up in the house 12 hours a day with isolation from all other animal and nature because I want a dog. I want this experience for 1 hour a day, and so I'm going to create a forced and unnatural environment that gives that to me. This is a cruel act. This artificial and absurd separation from biology, from history, from tradition, without regard for the cruelty of the suffering it causes. It's a cruel act to women raising single children in this way. This whole stress of creating work-life balance, it's a cruel act. It's incredibly difficult. And then it's incredibly difficult to have poise and femininity and grace when you're juggling finances and culture and work and politics in the logistics of our culture. It's difficult to maintain a soft and feminine demeanor, which is why it is a cruel act to deny women the full right to have anger, to express pain, to express the feelings that this brings up of exhaustion and hopelessness and grief. It's a cruel act to punish people for the feelings induced by the culture, which is constantly saying, you have a right to the life you want to live. Be unique. Do whatever the fuck you want, regardless of the data. That is a cruel act. I spent some time in the Philippines. My wife is a Filipina. And one of the things that becomes obvious there is the cruelty of the Catholic Church's continual pushing for incredibly high birth rates in a very poor country. 6 children, 7 children, 11 children, 1, 2, 3 children dying. It is a cruel act to bring so much poverty to parents with so little education, with so little welfare, to take care of even 3 children. But let's give them 8, and let's shame them if they manage their own birth rate. Let's make condoms difficult to get. Let's make the pill unavailable without a doctor's prescription. And then let's charge more than most of these families have to get the prescription, so that the poorest families who can't afford the prescription have more children they can't afford. This escalates child abuse. It's not a huge sampling with detailed conversations with more than 40 people. But the amount of abuse statistically in that 40-person sample is incredible. 5-year-old girls being hurled out of glass windows. Daughters being shot by revolvers. Men abandoning the families they can no longer afford to feed. It is an act of profound cruelty for the Catholic Church to see the pain in the people they claim to serve's lives, faces, and realities, to see that pain and refuse to differ the policy that creates it. This explosion in population creates traffic that is unbelievable. I've never seen anything so horrible, where it takes 6 hours to make a 45-minute trip. Anywhere else it would be 45 minutes, 35 minutes, but 6 hours. Draining people's lives. To see pain in statistically astronomical numbers in front of you and do nothing about it is a cruel act. And to call it God's will is the cruelest act of all. To confuse the evolution towards well-being, to confuse the evolution of well-being with God's will that you suffer is a cruel act. Now, it is a cruel act, for that matter, for the major religions to hold the highest deity as male and masculine. Buddha, Christ, Muhammad, Allah. It's all masculine energy. This is a cruel act. Because if you're born a woman or a feminine man, or if you have any femininity inside of you, hint, hint, we all do, the message is that half of who we are is less valuable than the other half. That the pinnacle of value is lopsided. This is a cruel act. It is a cruel act for the men, and it is a cruel act for the women. This does not bring balance or well-being. It creates frustration. It causes harm, but we don't change it. Education. To draw out that which is within. To develop and draw out the best that is within. To educate. It's not what's happening in so many of our schools, in so many ways. where the creativity, the initiative, the aliveness, the movement is shut down. The assertiveness, the individuality is shut down, where the emotions and the connection to behaving in the way that you feel is shut down. And one is not leaving school with the technology that will enable well-being in the cult or culture that we have created. You will not leave high school knowing how to start a business, which is a needed skill. You will not leave high school knowing how to drive, which is a needed skill. You will not leave high school knowing how to invest, which is a needed skill. You will not leave high school knowing how to take care of your body, which is a needed skill. You will not leave high school knowing how to interact with your local government to create positive change, which is a needed skill. You will not leave high school knowing how to run for office, which is a needed skill. You will not leave high school knowing how to conduct a marriage honorably, happily, sustainably. And that is a most necessary skill. You will not leave high school emotionally literate, knowing the names of every feeling and the environments that induce them and how to turn one feeling into another. This is something every single person needs every single day of their lives. Yet while the chemistry of emotions is willfully ignored, we learn the chemistry of trace elements and minerals, which most of us don't learn or do anything useful with for a single day of our lives. When's the last time you had to turn manganese into copper sulfate? When's the last time you used any of this? When's the last time you had a feeling and needed to know what to do with it? Today, an hour ago, right now? It is a cruel act when 20% of the population is depressed, when 1 in 7 has a substance addiction, when 1 in 3 domestic relationships contain aspects of domestic violence, when 20% of the population is involved in some form of sexual abuse, historically or in the present, when 60% of the population has undiagnosed and untreated trauma. It is a cruel act to continue a curriculum that sustains emotional illiteracy. We are surrounded by cruelty. We measure our productivity by the amount of natural resources we destroy in order to make things and sell them, and we call that progress. Meanwhile, we do not measure our human needs in our own citizens. Meaning, you cannot go anywhere in the United States. You cannot go anywhere in the United States and find how many people today, yesterday, or in this year felt a sense of love and belonging. You can't say, in Texas, love and belonging is 38%, meaning 38% of Texans feel a strong sense of love and belonging. 20% of New Yorkers do. There's nowhere to go for that information, nor is there a place where you are welcome to give it. We do not have a census for basic human needs. Every single human being in the history of humanity has had a need to survive. If you're not surviving, where does that data get entered? Where do you go to say, I'm a U.S. citizen, I'm not surviving. Here's how I'm not surviving, here's how I'm not surviving, and here's how I'm not surviving. Or what about the next need, to feel secure in that survival? Do you feel secure in your ability to meet all your basic needs? How secure do you feel? Why? Do you feel secure in your health? Do you feel secure in your finances, knowing you'll be thrown out in the street, needing a $650,000 house if you break your back, if you can't pay your medical bills, blah, blah, blah? Do you feel secure in that arena? Do you feel a sense of love and belonging, the third human need every human being has needed throughout the history of the species? Sense of being welcome. Do you have a sense of self-esteem and liking who you are? That is a human need. Monkeys have self-esteem and like who they are, unless they've been terribly abused. My dog likes who he is and shakes off trauma. You should see, he gets some little shock, shakes it all off, he resets, good to go. Are you developing your gifts, and are they honored in your community? This is a human need. And do you have a vehicle to teach, to give, to leave a legacy that matters, that is authentic, to go beyond your personal sense of self to be of service in some bigger way? That is a human need. And it's a hierarchy of need. You work on the one, the other, and they naturally unfold one after the other. When you feel secure, first thing you look for is meaningful interactions, unless you've been induced into so much trauma you're in a sociopathic state. We have millions of Americans walking around in a sociopathic state, and that is a cruel act. It is a cruel act to them, and it is a cruel act to everyone around them. We have millions of incest survivors that are walking around in a culture that does not respond healthily to that information. That is a cruel act to them and to the culture. We have tens of millions of addicts, and we shame our addicts, which is a cruel act. Rather than teaching about addiction and its causes in our schools, it is a cruel act. It is showing indifference to extraordinary amounts of suffering that we do not study this technology. I mean, when's the last time you heard of the latest study on new protocols to help people with alcohol addiction? When's the last time the government improved on AA? Or your community said, look, AA is doing a pretty good job, but we're a wealthy city. Our people are suffering in addiction. Not everyone can get a meeting. We want a census in our city. How many of you are addicted to what? What's the underlying trauma? What's the underlying pain? And how can we help you feel a sense of love and belonging and that you matter, so that you can contribute your gifts to our community rather than being shunted into secrecy and shame? There's no census for how many people in my city are meeting their human needs. Survival, security, love and belonging, self-esteem, developing gifts, contributing those gifts in a sense of abundance, and moving towards leaving a legacy, moving beyond the concern for the individual to the community as a whole. It's a cruel act not to facilitate that growth consciously with those around us. And it costs almost nothing. A $20,000 app can measure this stuff beautifully for a city. But with $78 million in my city's budget alone, the unanimous response at City Hall was indifference and discouragement of any idea of such an app. And no alternative. You ask, what's your housing plan for the homeless? They don't have one. Okay, so what did you do over the last 12 months? We're not going to tell you. You did something, right? What was it? Show me what was on the mayor's calendar. Show me. No, we're not going to tell you that. We're not going to deal with that. We'd love to hear from you as the public. But we're not going to respond. We're not going to be seen. It's an act of cruelty. Now, I may have a sociopathic government in San Rafael but it's a template. It's a microcosm. You think it's different in Washington? It is a cruel act to set up politicians the way that we've set up politicians. It's setting them up to be sociopathic, which is cruel to them and cruel to us. It is a cruel act to ensure that money determines so much of an election, creating prostitutes rather than leaders. Both the mayor in my city and the representative in Congress know less about homelessness than me after studying a little bit, because they're inundated with fundraising and special interests and stuff, and the homeless just don't show up on their radar. This is a cruel act. It is a cruel pattern. It is a cruel country that sustains this pattern of engagement without responding, without differing. Now, it's too big to solve, one might say, and there's some basis in saying it's a bit big to solve on a national level. But what about in groups of 100 or a town? What about a city? What about a neighborhood? I canvassed my neighborhood, trying to see about just an email list where everyone in our neighborhood could connect. Very little interest and indifference to what's going on in the neighborhood. That indifference is a cruel act. Now, what's happening culturally in the United States in particular is that every one of us is born into some degree of pain, crisis, trauma. And we ask for help. We cry, we scream, we tantrum, we have fits, we manipulate, we ask, we do all kinds of things as kids to try and get some help, try and get some love and support. And we're asked to lie a lot. And we're asked to fit into the parents' view and the cultural view. We're asked to stuff a lot of feelings. When we come right out and say, look, I've got a problem and I want help, the response in our culture is choreographed and predictable. It's not my problem. Yes, it's going to be tough. Yeah, it's a tough world. I'm not going to respond to that. I'm not your parent. I am your parent, but I'm busy. I can't do that. I'm not going to respond. It's not my problem. And this feels horribly painful. Why aren't I worth anything? And that's an unlivable feeling. And so we externalize it. We say, okay, it's not just me that's not worth anything. This is just a culture where I'm not going to respond to anyone else's pain, and they're not going to respond to mine. Your pain isn't my problem. My pain isn't your problem. We will be lonely together. 78% of Americans feel chronically lonely, and we're not doing anything about it as a culture. When's the last time you got an email from your city saying, we just heard 78% of people are regularly lonely? We're your city. We're your home. We take large sums of money under force. How can we help? Would you like us to have town hall meetings about loneliness and the kinds of activities in our city that would reduce loneliness? Town hall meetings where individuals can share what's making them lonely? Oh, I know. You went and knocked on your neighbor's doors and they wanted nothing to do with you. Oh, I see. Sounds pretty isolating to me, too. It's not a neighborhood. It's an isolation individualhood. Now, this is an American phenomenon to a large extent. I can go to Mexico or Thailand and feel more at home in a matter of hours. And I do. I spend large chunks of time in other countries so that I can feel at home. My $130 a month apartment, which has a nicer view than my house in San Rafael, which has a nicer location than my house in San Rafael, which has faster Wi-Fi than my home in San Rafael, and most importantly, has warmer neighbors than my home in San Rafael. My $130 a month apartment, another reason people aren't homeless in Thailand. Their building departments do not harass them out of existence. So in that environment, I feel at home. I'm so grateful to be invited to a neighborhood potluck on the first night I move in. And it's so casual, and it's so fun. It's so easy. You don't even speak the language, and I feel more at home there. It is a cruel act not to respond to that level of pain that is chronic and intergenerational in our culture, to not look at the data. It is a cruel act not to study this in high school and figure out how your life is not going to be lonely, despite a culture that conspires to say that a majority of people will feel lonely. In England, they have a ministry of loneliness, because that's how effective British culture is these days at creating isolation. The amount of TV, for example, consumed in private with non-married children that were raised in single-parent homes, that level of isolation and the habit of isolation creates chronic loneliness. So they have a minister of loneliness. We don't have that. And that's a cruel act. It is an indifference to one of the most deep pains in the human psyche, to feel alone and to have the sense that one will be lonely indefinitely. It is a killer. Loneliness kills off life, shortens lifespan. It is a cruel act to be as chauvinistic as we are as a culture. It is a cruel act to emphasize activity and ignore presence, to emphasize the masculine and ignore the feminine. There are no eye-gazing rituals in the United States. Hand-holding with a friend might even be common with male friends in France or Spain. Doesn't happen. Let's cut the oxytocin down. Tenderness between boys in the United States is routinely shamed, humiliated, and called gay, with the assumption being that to be gay is to be inferior, which is a cruel and barbaric act. It is a cruel thought because it creates pain. based on ignorance, based on stupidity. We need more boys, more men to feel emotionally connected and in secure emotional relationships with themselves and other men. We need that for them to be good fathers. And we do the exact opposite by attacking. This is an act of cruelty. And it is a cruel act that this is not a major town issue for every town in this country. To understand that we have town meetings to discuss fine-tuned aspects of building code, of how to make houses more expensive, but we do not have town meetings about the chronic pain of people in the town. The marriages falling apart from addiction don't get a town meeting, and that is a cruel act. The mayor doesn't respond to emotionally based emails, and that's a cruel act. We are living in an incredible amount of cruelty, but we're not seeing it. The cruelty in our parents being emotionally unavailable, being addicts, being traumatized, using unregulated violence, and not confronting and dealing with that intergenerational pattern is a cruel act. And because this is facaded, whitewashed, plastered over with the dogma of Christianity, which does not teach people how to feel or understand their feelings, it teaches people what they ought to be feeling, which is an act of abuse. You should feel grateful to the parents who beat you. That's actually not how psychology works. You feel grateful when you feel safe and protected. If you do not feel safe and protected, it means the parent and the culture did not attune to your feeling, did not understand your biology, and that is a cruel act. Because biology and psychology have been around for a few million years. It's just we're not looking at them. And that willful ignorance, leading to negligence, leading to pain, leading to indifference, a refusal to change the behavior that creates that pain, is a cruel act. And that cruelty, masked with demands for gratitude, with the resentment that a parent often feels when hearing their child's feeling, is a cruel act. But it's not owned as cruelty, which makes an exploration of the buried, invisible cruelty in front of us, within us, without us, a kind thing to do. It's a different thing to do. Meaning I'm 44 years old, and nobody has helped me understand in my entire history in this country what's cruel. That's all around me. Now, when you don't see and understand what cruel is, how can you respond to it? How can you change? How can you be different to something that is not acknowledged? When I smile warmly at Americans, particularly children in parks, I'm looked at as a pedophile, and that is a cruel act. It is a cruel act to set men up who are warm to be more suspicious than men who are in a sociopathic state and show no interest at all. When that's cross-wired, when I have to go to other countries to feel like a human being, it's a cruel act. I have 10 seconds, basically, as a male. In this country, I have 10 seconds to play with a kid before I'm a pedophile in 89% of the parents' eyes. You can see it. What are you doing? Why are you showing interest in my kid? The isolation that creates chronic loneliness in America is induced by a misguided notion that strangers are more dangerous than your own family, who statistically abuse you significantly more. The odds of who you're going to be kidnapped by is someone you know, not a stranger. The odds of who you're going to be raped by is someone you know, not a stranger, usually a family member. So all the statistics are saying, be scared of the American family. It's sick and it's dangerous. Watch out. But all the news is, don't talk to strangers. Isolating the child, giving the kid the exact wrong information. The truth is, if you have a wide range of resources by engaging with the unknown, with strangers in the outside world, then if you are abused at home, you'll have somewhere to go and tell someone who's safe. So let's do the exact opposite and tell kids that strangers are the enemy, that 99.99% of the entire world is your enemy and a threat, to make sure that you remain isolated as opposed to having healthy connections. You know, my parents thought it was really great to avoid engaging with the culture, since the culture was so unevolved and blah, blah, blah. So I'm stuck with the narcissism of my parents without other resources. It's a cruel act. When we can understand what cruelty is, when we can see how much pain by measuring it, let's measure this neighborhood, let's measure this city. Let's get some data. How can you not be indifferent when you hide that which demands a response? You see, I've never received a questionnaire, how much pain are you in emotionally in this city? What is your pain from? What could government do? I've never received that email. And that's a cruel act. Because if I suggest it with a mayor who won't respond to emails, with a city council who won't talk, if I suggest it, the fact that it costs absolutely nothing. I know one of your $78 million worth of employees, etc., will write an email and invite the city to talk about their emotional health and what the city could do better. I know. It's a great idea. Let's do it this morning. It doesn't even occur to us to shift the pattern of cruelty. It just occurs to us that this is not the kind of thing that Americans do because we're cruel. Because we don't know what cruelty is. We're not adding up the math of this data and saying that we are being profoundly cruel to ourselves, our children, and our homeless with our protocols. We're being profoundly cruel to our children in education. We're being profoundly cruel to our single parents. We're being profoundly cruel to the majority of people who don't like their jobs but are afraid to quit in case they can't find one that they do like. We're being profoundly cruel to the incest survivors, sexual abuse survivors, etc., that understand that in a cruel culture, if they talk about the abuse, they will get more backlash in one way or another than sympathy and support. That if they talk about their suicide, there's a good chance that they'll be uninvited from the parties as opposed to, how can we help you? What do you need? And suicide is one of the second leading causes of death in America, a phenomenal statistic. You see, it takes incredible amounts of sustained cruelty to induce a mammalian species into suicide. Incredible amounts of sustained cruelty. The tarsier monkey in the Philippines is the only mammal I know that commits suicide other than humans. Tarsier monkey, humans. Why do the tarsier monkeys commit suicide? They're incredibly sensitive. They don't like sound, light, noise, movement, and they're very, very, very slow moving. They're one of the smallest monkeys around. Well, tourists coming from America, they just want to have photos of interesting monkeys. So they flash and click and talk and shake the trees to get the monkey to move. And the dissociation from the needs of that monkey as a sensitive, as a slow, highly sensory overloading brain, is such that those monkeys commit suicide to avoid the violation from the tourists who do not understand them. And these are the same tourists raising children. Not attuning, not bothering to read the data, not putting a vulnerable minor's needs ahead of their own. Who cares if a monkey commits suicide? This is interesting to me. This makes a good photo on Facebook. Who cares if my child is in suicidal pain? I've got to take my next selfie to look good on Instagram. It's the same mentality, and it is a cruel mentality. It is a barbaric mentality that leads to pain in such high doses that our mammalian group stands out amongst millions of species in creating so much pain for itself as a species that suicide is one of the leading causes of death in the United States. This is astounding, and it is a cruel act not to study suicide in high school and understand the culture's culpability in inducing, ignoring, creating, and shaming those in so much pain that their best plan is killing themselves. That's quite an accomplishment, considering the amount of wealth and resources. When you consider the amount of use that you and I are going to generate 102 tons of garbage, that's just the bit we don't know what to do with for all the stuff we consume, all the travel we do, all the movement, all the food we eat, all that. We're going to take all of that energy and be in so much pain after consuming 102 metric tons of garbage over the course of a lifetime that we want to die? When other species, for millions of years, takes 1/1000th of that energy and wants to live. But we take 1,000 times more energy and want to die. That speaks to a level of mental emotional incompetence that corresponds with mental emotional illiteracy. And a product like the death statistics or the amount of people who die lonely and scared of dying. Monkeys don't deal with that. Parrots don't deal with that. Most Buddhists don't deal with that. Most Americans do. It is cruel to see all this pain and not differ. It is sociopathic to see this pain and not change. Making this video is an invitation. If you want to brainstorm with me, Here's some ways to change this, that, the other. If you want to show some way that I can partner with you or you can partner with me to make a difference, I'm making a documentary on homelessness. I started a little nonprofit that I self-fund, with called happinessdata.org to gather data that's useful. If you want to talk about some of your feelings with the goal of responding to some of the cruelty going on in your life or in mine, if you want to form a group that creates a circle to hold some of this energy so that it's not held in isolation, this is an invitation. Thank you.